All right.
There you go.
All right. Well, this is just an example of how it's all a team effort. Let me get back down to here. I was going to say that, you can look at this, doing this as somewhat of a chore. It's a chore for us, the same as for y'all, but it's beneficial. And I'm going to come back to that. It has a use to you and a benefit to you that I'll emphasize here in a second. The people that use these data, first of all, probably the number one user is administration. I know for a fact that district and regional administrators use it for their evaluations, but we use it for needs assessment. We use it to diagnose trends in agriculture across the state. We use it for interpretive events for clientele, such as bulletins like that and like that. And those same clientele call us up regularly from the governor on down, asking for these data because they want to know how important is agriculture in this region or in this county or in this congressional district, or the senator staff want to know for the whole state. These people want these numbers because it's the only timely and like county level source of data that exists. USDA, who is a great keeper of ag statistics, the data that they put out at the county level is 2 years lagged. So they call us up every year and they want this data. And other people want this data too, like I listed, trial lawyers, bankers, all kinds of folks. So it's in demand. And like I say, the kinds of questions that are being asked that they use this data to answer involve, policy stuff. They involve our assessment of natural disasters, the drought that's coming in 21. We're going to use county level increment report data to assess some of those impacts. If you're dealing with a situation with, let's say you have a new pest that's attacking, I'll just say watermelons in your district, the increment report is going to be the first answer to what's the economic impact of that particular minor use crop across the state. And that's what we would use to come up with a Section 18 emergency use label proposal to the EPA. So there's a lot of different uses that are all important that make this somewhat invaluable as a data resource. So, I'm an economist, so I believe in motivation. I believe in self-interest as a major motivation. So I would say, do the best job you can to make the increment report data for your county something that's accurate. Do that for your own sake. Do it for your own interpretation to your important government officials, your county folks. Do it to have you be the recognized local expert on agriculture. Do it so that you know what's going on in your county. The pulse of ag production in your county. So do it for all those reasons. Okay, what's the process, the annual process of collecting the data and putting together the report? This basically outlines it here on this one slide. Every fall, we send out a packet of information to all the counties. That packet includes worksheets. It includes a template for the increment report data that you're going to be collecting so that you can put the data, fill it out and send it back to us. So that's like a survey form. It includes supporting information like statewide and national prices of crops. And we usually send that out usually by Halloween. We were delayed this year. So it went out, I think, after Thanksgiving, but it should be out. Then over the process of the winter, not that you didn't have other things to do like the holidays and stock shows, is the process of primary and secondary data collection by agents, and they complete the worksheets, and the transfer the information onto the increment report form and give that to their DEAs, and the deadline for that is the end of January. And those DEAs will collect all that and they'll forward it to me. And so we get that in January, and then we error check it and that takes us a couple of months, and we twist the arms of the late responding counties and get all that information in the spring, and then we usually post. We create the new books, which exist online as PDF, big PDF files, and we post them online usually in May. That didn't happen this year because none of us were in the office in May, but ordinarily that's the goal. Get all that out. So I'm going to go through some of the stuff that's in that packet, some of those forms and how to fill them out, and helpful data sources you can use to go through and complete it. I'm not monitoring the chat, but Robert may see it, and my grad student Anthony is watching it too. I would just as soon you interrupt me so I can hear you and ask your questions as we go. And I'm going to say this up front. I'm the compiler and the publisher of this information, but I haven't filled out these kinds of worksheets and done it for an actual county since I was a district economist. It's been 15 or 20 years. So I'm not going to know the answer to everything, but we can get our questions answered one way or the other. So don't hesitate to just interrupt me and ask me. But anyway, you're going to have worksheets like this that were mailed to you. And where we're driving towards with these worksheets is a calculation that's going to be in that column there. That's going to be estimates of the aggregate sales value of all these different commodities, the ones that you have, for the year that's wrapping up for 2020. There's also a place for the estimate of a forecast, a projection of next year's. I will tell you that this column is the one that we're really doing the work on, doing the ground truthing on, collecting data on. This column tends to be what it says, more of a projection. More often than not, this column is just the same as this, or it's maybe 5% more or 5% less than this. The way these books or data are used, this is the most important part of it. This doesn't get used for quite as much, but it is a signal to us if you happen to know that, I don't know, let's say a chicken integrator is going out of business and there's going to be a big drop in income for a certain livestock category. You could reflect that in this column. That's mainly where we use it for, but we don't look at these as much as we look at these right here. Okay, this is what's the most important to me, are these numbers here. And they're the results, in the case of crops, of the sum of acres times some yield times some price is equal to a great big dollars number. That's what's there. How that gets translated into the increment report form is that these numbers that go in these columns here, which are in dollars, get translated to this increment report form, which you should have also received this template in your packet. Those numbers go to these numbers. Those columns go to these columns, okay? The only difference between them is these columns are reported in thousands of dollars. So if you had $1 million entry here, $1 million there would be reflected as 1,000 here because it's already multiplied by 1,000. I don't want to confuse you. It's just to make it fit, because you can't put huge numbers in these narrow columns. So these are expressed in thousands, but they're the same numbers that come from these worksheets right here, just adjusted from actual dollars to thousands of dollars, okay? Let me say also one more thing. If for some reason you are missing all your worksheets, there's a crops one, a livestock one, a wildlife one, an other use one. If you're missing those worksheets and you need them, or you're missing this template and you need it, or you need an Excel version of it, you can email me, or you can email the grad students at that email right there. We will send you duplicate copies. It's easier for us to email them to you, but one way or the other, we'll get them to you if you're missing them or you never got them in the first place. We get our address labels for the county offices from the 5th floor, and it never fails that 3 or 4 of those are wrong for some reason. I haven't really figured that out, but they come bouncing back to us. So if you didn't get yours, we'll send them to you. Okay. That's all I want to say there. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of go through some of these workshops, the elements of them, the data that go into them, just to kind of help you fill them out and help you know where to go and get information to backstop your efforts to get the data. So I'm going to begin with acres. When we're talking about crops, harvested acres is what goes in this column for all of these particular commodity categories. Where do we get acreage information from? All right, well, there's generally speaking, there's two sources of data. Primary data is what you actually collect by talking to people. And secondary data is what the government collects that we can access. So we'll talk about both. Our target here is harvested acres. Okay, so in the world of crop data, there's planted acres and harvested acres. We want harvested acres. The best source of primary data when we're talking about crops would be the buyers and processors of those crops. So if you're talking about cotton, the gin manager. If you're talking about grain, the grain elevator managers. If you're talking about vegetables, the packing sheds, the meat processors, all those folks are, because they're a volume business, they tend to have a pretty good sense of the surrounding acres of the crops that they depend on and process. So, there's one reason to go talk to those people, go visit with them, get to know them. Besides just knowing the pulse of what's going on in your county, they're going to be a good estimate of what's going on acreage wise and other trends for those crops. So visiting with the local agribusiness people is an important source of those data. Some of those crops also have commodity organizations, regional organizations with knowledgeable staff, and they'll may have a sense of that. So for example, for cotton in the plains, plains cotton growers keeps up with the acreage and other trends of that crop, and other commodity organizations are similar. There are various USDA agencies that are potential sources of crop data. RMA is one that the Risk Management Agency, that's a Chihuahua in case you're interested. The Risk Management Agency does keep track of current data, lagged a month or two, but to get it, you have to go to the risk management website, which is a chore. So I don't go there if I don't have to. A source of historical crop data can be found from the National Ag Statistics Service of USDA. With this website here, I won't click it because y'all apparently won't see it, but this link is in this presentation about 3 times. It's what I call the quick stats source. You can get county level data, but at the county level, it's usually lagged about 2 years. So where it's useful is, if you're a new agent and you're trying to figure out, generally speaking, how much corn and cotton and wheat and row crops have been grown in the past in this county, you can find that out. You can find historical acreage and yield and production data by clicking on this, and it'll take you, you're going to have to scroll down to Texas, or you'll have to scroll down to the counties in Texas and find your county, but you can find historical information there, which will help you somewhat benchmark, the previous trends of acreage, and then you can update them with what has been grown historically. So anyway, NASS historical data is useful. The last USDA agency, and probably the most useful source of data, is going to be the Farm Services Agency, because farmers, when they're planting stuff, will certify a lot of that data at the FSA office, and they'll do that within the growing year. They do it in the summertime typically. So FSA certified acres, which if you click on that site or scribble it down or come back to the recording and get that site, or just Google it, FSA certified acres, it's going to take you to a link that's going to, best I can tell, it starts with Autauga County, Alabama, and you just scroll down to where you're looking at your county in Texas, and it will present data on what a whole bunch of wide range of crops, comprehensive, minor crops, vegetable crops, row crops, and it'll break it down by crop use, dryland irrigated, and the status. For example, is it wheat that was planted for baling as hay, or wheat that was just for grain, or wheat that was grazed first and then for grain, or was it grazed out totally, et cetera, et cetera. All those different designations of acreage will be reported. It'll be reported that way. So there's a lot of detail there, which it'll be somewhat useful for some of the calculations that you may be doing. So the USA certified acres data is important. It comes out in the summertime, like usually in July is when it's posted first. Then they redo it several times in the fall, October, November. They're going to redo it again in December or January. So it's updated. And like I say, it's useful because it's comprehensive. It's useful because it's real time. It's data from this year. So I would commend it to you there. There's also, if you have a FSA office, and the data that show up on the website start by filings at the local office. And if you go to church with the county director or play golf with him or what have you, you might ask him first, because he's got the data before it shows up at the state office or shows up on the national website. So he might be somebody you want to visit with. Okay, so that was acreage. What about yields? That's the next thing we got to concern ourselves with. Sources, this is pretty obvious. Who would you talk to? For yields, I would talk to growers for yield data. I would talk to your growers on your crops committee. I would talk to agronomy specialists at your district offices. I would talk to, y'all do field trials. That's a source of average yield data that might be representative. This is the same NASS link, USDA NASS, National Ag Statistics Service, the Ag Stats data. Again, you can get historical yield data for major crops that would let you characterize what average yields have been in the past, and that might be a useful benchmark for the kind of year that you're in now. So all those things are useful. So that's yields, acres, yields. The combination of those is going to be a calculation of the volume, keeping track of the same units. So if we were talking wheat, acres harvested of wheat, bushels per acre of wheat is going to equal a large volume of bushels. The next thing we need is prices. So let's look at that. Sources of price data. First of all, the info packet that we mailed to you has some price data. It's from, I believe technically it's what NASS calls average prices received at the state level, at the national level. It's probably dated. There's a stopping point. It stopped sometime in 2020, those data, and it's probably for the old crop situation, but so it's last year's prices. But again, it's a benchmark that, if you could get somebody to tell you, well, this year the prices are 10 cents higher than they were last year. If you have some notion of last year's prices, then you could make use of that. Other sources, relevant sources of price data include all these government acronyms. It includes the Ag Marketing Service, AMS, is an agency of USDA. They're the ones that are on the radio with bids and offers for grain, different parts of the state, or quotes, daily spot quotes for cotton prices across the state. That's collected by AMS, and that's useful benchmark, real-time sort of price data. So you could use that. Again, your gins and elevators, they're buyers, or the gins are facilitating buying of cotton, so they generally know what cotton's being bid and offered. Packing sheds for vegetable crops and feedlots and slaughterhouses are, they know what those products are selling for. So You can get relevant price data from them. Ag lenders have some notion of prices when they work up their loans for folks. So, and prices and yields. So, those are useful people to know and bounce things off of. And commodity groups. And in Ag Eco, I'm the cotton marketing guy, and we have a grain marketing guy, Mark Welch, and a livestock marketing guy, David Anderson. We can talk to you about prices in your part of the state for particular commodities. So a number of different sources of info there. Again, if you have a question or, what about this or what if that, or I tried this, whatever, interrupt me and ask me. I'm just kind of going to grind on through this. So in the case of one commodity, let's say that you've collected all the data that we've talked about so far. Let's say that you from historical data and from talking to the elevator, you know that there's 10,000 acres of wheat in your county this year, or was earlier this year, and that the average yield is 20 bushels. It's good to put the units in there to keep yourself straight. So that would multiply through to 200,000 bushels. And let's say Mark Welch tells you that the 2020 average wheat price in your county was $4 a bushel. So you multiply that times that, and you come up with an aggregate dollar amount, which if that was to translate into the increment report form, remember that's in thousands. So that would be 800 is what would be reported on the increment report form to reflect $800,000 right here. Okay, that's how we would do that. Now let's spend a little bit of time talking about the actual classification of different crops and livestock, because we've kind of got our own system that's evolved over time. So the first thing when we're talking about crops that we need to distinguish is food crops versus what do we call food crops versus feed crops. So things that are eaten, and I guess things that are drunk by humans, we report as food crops. Okay, so wheat and rice and rye are food crops. There's usually some confusion about how to treat corn. So it is possible to put food corn under the food crops category, but we're only talking, if you do that, we're only talking about white corn that somebody like the Azteca plant would be buying to make tostada chips or tortillas or something. So if you have acreage of food corn, white corn, it would go under food crops only if it's that kind of corn. If you have sweet corn, that's not, to us, that's not corn at all, or it's not food corn, it's not feed corn. That comes later under the vegetable worksheet. So don't put sweet corn anywhere in here. And most corn is feed corn, a feed grain, which is yellow corn or field corn. And that's going to be entered under, again, as a feed crop. Just to be confusing, other feed crops include hay, but only if it's a grass hay, because alfalfa hay under our system shows up under a miscellaneous crop. I apologize for that sounding all confusing. It is confusing, but it's just sort of the evolution of how we classify things. So you'll find alfalfa hay under the miscellaneous crop worksheet. You'll find regular hay under the feed crops. So let's go back and look at it. There's regular hay. If it's a grass type hay, silage and all that stuff would come here too. And there is typically some confusion about units of feed grains. So be careful with that. Be careful that when you're talking about hay crops that the units are generally tons. So make sure that they are. And let's just go through another example. Let's say that you know from talking to the elevator that you have 10,000 acres of standing corn that was harvested for grain. And let's say you talk to your row crops committee and your best corn farmer on that committee says, yeah, I do a little better, but typical irrigated yield is going to be about 200 weight per acre. So you put that put that in there, that multiplies through to 20,000 there, and you get, again, a corn price from Dr. Welch that's $4 a bushel, and you multiply it on through. Any problems anybody sees with that offhand? Seems straightforward. I'm trying to get audience feedback. Yeah, there's a problem with that. There's 3 problems with that. So the first problem is that there weren't any units here, so it was very easy to be led astray. When you multiplied 200 weights per acre times 10,000 harvested acres, what did you get, strictly speaking? You got 20,000 hundredweights per acre is what you got. 20,000 hundredweights, which multiply that times 100 will give you 2 million pounds is the volume, 2 million pounds. And then you multiply that erroneously times a bushel price. So you got to multiply, you get 2 million pounds over here correctly. You'd have to convert that to bushels. All these grain prices and yields need to be in bushels. So be consistent about that. When we're talking about grains, you got to convert it to bushels. So you would take that 2 million pounds there, divide it by 56 pounds per bushel for corn, and you'd come up with another number that you would multiply times $4 a bushel, and you should come out to about $142,000 instead of 80. Now, let me just say, we have some automatic numbers checking things built into our database. When we plug your numbers in, if they're off compared to last year's number for that particular category of crop, if they're off by more than, I forget what it is, Anthony, 50% or something, we'll get a little flag that'll help zero in and look at it. There's not that big of a difference in this error between 80,000 and 142. I'm not really sure our system automatically flag it. So unless Anthony or Wilson are really sharp-eyed and just happen to notice that you were talking hundredweights over here and then you're multiplying by bushels over here, they hopefully would see that because they're young and alert. But anyway, keep track of your units, write your units into your worksheet, and you'll be better off. You know, I forgot, I don't think I really preached my sermon about turning in your worksheets. So let me just preach it here. It helps, it should probably help you just to keep things straight, to use this worksheet. This worksheet is kind of like the Sabbath. You weren't created for this worksheet. It was created for you. It was created for your use. Not everybody uses the worksheets. Some people just, crunch their numbers and send us the final increment report with the values in there. But I would say use this worksheet to help keep yourself straight, to help keep your units straight. And then please, if you use this worksheet, go ahead and send it in, turn it in with your increment report form, turn it in, it'll get to us. And we depend on these things for just this kind of example. We go back and fact check these things. Sometimes, if we didn't have this worksheet, we would probably not catch the difference between that error and that correct number, but we will if we have the worksheet to work off of. Sometimes we run into obvious errors, but we don't have the worksheet and we can't figure it out because we don't have the calculations. So we have to end up calling the county and say, we noticed that your wheat numbers were 900% higher than the previous 3 or 4 years. Can we look at that with you? That's what we'll end up doing if we can't figure it out ourselves. So please use the worksheet if it's helpful to you. And if you use it, send it on in with your increment report form. I don't care if there's scribbles in the margin. Fact is, I'm depending on you to have scribbles in the margin so that we can kind of track what you did. So by all means, send your worksheet in. All right, other crops in the crops categories include oil seeds and cotton. For oil seed crops, if you're talking soybeans, you treat that just like you treat corn. If you're talking things like canola and sesame and sunflowers, those are often grown with a processing contract. They're grown with some kind of processor, oil processor, or confectionery company or whatever. And so, you know, you can get yield information and price information, contract prices from talking to growers, but to get the number of acres, total acres in your county, you might need to talk to the contractor if you can get a hold of him and find out, you know, how many acres did they contract of that particular oilseed crop. So that's just one point about them. When it comes to cotton, it's, you know, it's another crop. What makes it kind of unique in this situation is that cotton produces two outputs: cotton lint and cotton seed. And so the way we handle that is, if you, let's say you knew that there was 10,000 acres of cotton and you got an average yield from field trials or from your agronomist or from somebody of 800 pounds of lint per acre, when you enter that, we have a formula here that would let you convert to come up with the tons of cottonseed per acre. So if you know that you've got 800 pounds of lint per acre, you would multiply that 800 pounds of lint times 1.447 and then divide it by 2,000 pounds per acre. I'm sorry, 2,000 pounds per ton. And to come up with this number here, that's 0.58. There's the calculation. Anyway, so you start off with a pounds per acre of lint. You can generate a tons of cottonseed per harvested acre number there. And then you multiply both of them times the number of acres to come up with the volume of pounds of lint, tons of cottonseed. And then you can apply a dollars per pound price that you get from the gin or from a merchant or from me, and the same for the dollars per ton that you could get. I would get that number from a gin since they sell the cottonseed directly, and multiply it on through. Okay. So this is on your worksheet. So just remember, it's pounds, the pound of lint yield times that formula is going to give you the cottonseed yield. You go from there. Okay. All right, moving on from row crops, we get to vegetable crops. There's a vegetable worksheet. You'll notice on the vegetable worksheet that most of the major vegetables have their own line item, like watermelons and honeydews and onions and cantaloupes. I mentioned earlier, sweet corn is one of a number of vegetables there, and there's a lot of weird vegetables in the world. There's a lot of minor crops that won't have a line item, so they're going to go under other vegetables. So here's what that worksheet looks like, and there's other vegetables, which, you know, like I say, particularly South Texas, a whole bunch of different kinds of things will go in under that line. Now I've got a kind of an obvious note to myself and to you to be careful with units, kind of in the same way that I was saying before with grain crops. You know, don't mix bushels with hundredweights, but with vegetables, you got to really be careful, because there are some really strange, and fruits too, some really strange traditional harvest and price units of vegetables. For example, you will find things like 5/8 bushels as units, and 21-pound cartons, just stuff that you wouldn't imagine. But they're out there. If you're talking to, you know, growers or packing sheds or marketing orders, they'll refer to those kinds of units. So, you know, when you get your data, just double check your units and be consistent. Be consistent for your yield, be consistent for your prices, and you'll be okay. It's the same thing with fruits and nuts. There's some, you know, for citrus, I remember there were some kind of odd sounding to me, because I'm not in that industry, unit. So just be careful. What else to say about some of these crops? You know, if you're around, like, let's say pecan production, you already know this. There are big variations in some of these crops. There are annual cycles. There's boom years and bust years when it comes to particularly nut crops. That'll show up in the data. You might not, you know, you may see the swings in data and wonder why, but, you know, it's a function of the data. It's a function of the crop. So just know that. We have a miscellaneous crops worksheet with a lot of other stuff. The alfalfa that I mentioned before, other things, nursery crops, turf. You know, if you're in a county that's surrounding a metropolitan area, you'll have a lot of these businesses, and they'll generate a lot of income, and you'll want to try to capture as much of it as you can. This is where it goes. If you have people making money off hemp, it's going to be, for the time being, it's going to be a miscellaneous crop category. So there's fruits up there. There's the miscellaneous crops down there. Here's other crop here. So you got weird stuff. It's going to show up. It's going to show up down there. One thing I'll say about those nursery crops, you know, that's the kind of thing where it's not really, doesn't make sense to talk about acres and yields. You know, if you've got a number of nurseries, you know, the best you may get is they may tell you what their gross sales were, what their gross income was. So these may be aggregate $1 million amounts that you put in here that you get directly from them, or I don't know, from the Chamber of Commerce or from somebody, but you just may have those kinds of entries there just because of the nature of those businesses. So you can plan for that. Okay, so that's all the crop stuff. We can move on to livestock, which let me say up front, I'm not a livestock guy, but I know enough to be dangerous. So let's just go on through it. Some of the patterns are similar to before, some are unique to livestock. So I said something before about cycles with nut pecans. There are cycles with livestock inventories. They have a certain, I use the word fixity, you know, the cattle inventory is a big number. It takes a while for herd numbers to increase or decrease. They kind of do it slowly over time. So that tends to drive the production values of the various livestock commodities. So you take that into account. So one of the things you need to know is, well, you know, what are the major trends in herd size, in inventories, in flocks? Did they go up or down? Did you have cohorts of young livestock that are getting older, you know, growing out? Did you have big disruptions like, you know, a big drought that's going to cause a lot of destocking? It might actually cause a lot of sales for a bad reason, but, you know, this year might be unique, or actually next year might be unique because you have a whole bunch of cull sales, or it's just sales of stock that are moved out of state because of the drought. That's something that can influence the numbers at the margin. Sometimes we see big shifts in like poultry production, and the reason is because an integrator opened up in an area or shut down in an area, and so you'll have a big discrete change because of that. So you need to be on top of those kinds of things. How do you be on top of it? Well, if you can talk to the buyers and the integrators, they should have an idea, but talking to producers, talking to your committee people is the way to keep up with that kind of stuff. So you want to interpret, stay on top of those trends. So the livestock worksheets, when it comes particularly to the cattle, I kind of split them into two groups. There's the value added items, and those are going to include fed beef and stockers. And what you have to keep in mind there is that the production involved is usually weight gain. Okay, so the value is going to be kind of the difference in the price per pound of that animal when it weighed less versus the price per pound after it was finished grazing or finished being fed. And I'll just tell you that we get a lot of errors in the livestock section, and they come in this particular subcategory of livestock. Okay. Then there's a whole nother section of livestock, of cattle particularly, that simply involve the production of a whole animal, be it a calf or or a cull animal or breeding stock. And so those sales are going to be reflected in just the dollar per head sales at the sale barn. All right, so let's talk about the fed beef one first. This is just an example of, and these numbers are from a couple years ago from the west central part of the state. But, again, we're figuring the value of this feeder calf from at the beginning and when it was over. So when it's sold as a slaughter animal, it was heavier at a typical lower price for a heavier animal. And when it started the process, it was lighter at the typically higher price for a lighter animal. So you do this calculation of the difference in the value, and that's what you want down there. You want that 459 number times the number of fed calves in your county. It's the value of the gain is what you're getting at. Now, overshot. No, here we go. That number right there, every year somebody makes this mistake. For fed cattle, they will go to the slaughterhouse and they'll get a printout of, the value of the animals that were fed and slaughtered, because those numbers are easy to get, and they'll turn that in their increment report. But that's wrong. That would overstate the value that we're driving at. That would overstate it by 3 or 4 or 5 times because it's the value of the gain that you want to do. So again, how do you come up with that 459? How do you come up with these numbers to derive that value? You have to know what's the typical starting weight and the typical ending weight. I would assume you would get that either from a producer or from the slaughterhouse, and these typical prices, you get that from them, or you can call your district economist or call David Anderson or call me, and I'll probably hand you off to David Anderson. But we can get you these values if you don't know where to get them from. So that's the fed beef example. And where it would go, that 459 value times, in this example, 5,000 of those animals in your county is going to calculate through to the total value of that particular line item. Okay, so that's fed beef. The other one, again, is stocker cattle, which is the other value added item, the other major value added item. And there, you're doing the same sort of exercise. Here, you've got a calf. You're starting it in March when it weighs less, when you've got some sort of price value for that calf when you're starting to graze. And then when it's finished in the fall, it's heavier. You've got a typical price, average price associated with it when it's finished. You subtract off those values to come up with the net gain. And there's some obvious assumptions that have to be built into that, like how many months it's grazing and the rate of daily gain. That's going to be unique to your particular situation. So, lay all those out. I would love, there's not much room on the worksheet for you to include all this kind of stuff, but if it was scribbled in the margin, it would make life a whole lot easier for us if we have to double check it or cross check it. And it should be noted that it is quite possible to have a negative number. I've seen it before. Sometimes calf prices will crash in the middle of the year, and so if it's a negative number, it's a negative number. Just again, turn it in here. Here's the value for that gain times an assumed 7,500 head of those kinds of stockers to compute out to the aggregate value. Again, these would get translated to the increment report form after dividing them by 1,000. Okay. Another source of stockers are the ones that get put on wheat pasture in some parts of the state. So this is another example of that. Now here, the example starts with the available wheat acreage to graze and sort of backs into the number of calves. So if you were to go to the FSA certified acres data, this is somewhere in the West Central District. I think this is Taylor County. You get a lot of detail on different kinds, different classifications of wheat acres, like that's the ones that were grown just for standing hay, or that were hayed. That's the ones that were the wheat that was grown and only used for grain. This is the one that was grazed for a while and then the stalkers were pulled off and then it was harvested for grain. That code refers to the acres that were just grazed out, and then failed acres and prevented acres and various wheat as a cover crop. The ones that are associated with stalkers, obviously, are the ones that have something to graze. So that would be these two. So we're going to take these numbers and back into a number of calves. So here's an example of that. We've got this, both of these are available for early grazing. So if you add them together, you've got a total of 36,000 plus acres here, the sum of those two that are available for early grazing. Typical stocking rate is 3 acres per calf. So you take that, divide it by 3, and you're approximating that you had over 12,000 calves, stalker calves on that early wheat. So if you did the kind of externally here, if you did the kind of exercise that we did with the summer stalkers to come up with, the starting weight and the starting price subtracted from the ending weight and the ending price, you could compute a value per hundredweight, which you could translate to a value per calf. Here's an example of one here, multiply it by the number of calves and come up with an aggregate value. Again, that was for the early grazing. Now, if you're gonna use it for grain, this isn't available for later grazing. So for later grazing, it's only this that's available. These many acres are going to be available for later grazing, and the stocking rate is a little bit lower. So take this number in this example, divide it by that stocking rate, you're going to come up with that number of calves, which is a lower number. You're going to externally compute the starting weight, the starting price, less subtracted from the ending weight, the ending price, to come up with a value per hundredweight, translate it to the value per calf, multiply it by the number of calves, and you're going to come up with an aggregate value there. I would combine those two here and here to come up with a total value. Now, there's only one line for stalker cattle on the worksheet, and we already put something in it for the summer stalkers. So just find some other available blank line, like dairy calves. There's no dairy calves in your county. Scratch it out and scratch in winter stalkers, and you can record those numbers here, the number of head and the aggregate value. And here you're just taking over that line here to do that. So remember, this worksheet was created for you and not the other way around. So just make use of it. The more notes you put, the more scribbles you put, the more calculations you show, the better we can follow what you did. Okay, so those were the value added livestock numbers. The other ones I think are a little bit more straightforward, and that's just things that were produced, animals that were produced and then sold for their sales value per head. So there's a whole section of those kinds of things, and it includes obviously calves, breeder cattle, heifers. It may include slaughter animals. It would include slaughter animals. It would include registered animals. So a lot of these calculations of all these things are driven, or they can be figured as a function of the number of cows, the cow inventory in your county. It's an easy way to get at least an estimate of these kinds of numbers. So this is about the third time I've shown this link. This is the quick stats link. If you click on it, and start scrolling, you're going to see different menus. The first thing you'll see are different links to different crops. There's one down there, there's a cattle link, a livestock link, but there's a cattle link. If you click on it and scroll down, you will see the cattle inventory on January the 1st of 2020 by county. It'll show you the estimated number of cows in your particular county at the beginning of 2020. And that's a starting number that you can use then to estimate all of these sorts of livestock items. So let's just look at some examples of that. We're going to start with calves. So let's go through, this is a Tom Green County example. We're looking for the number of calves produced. Well, that's obviously a function of the number of cows. So you could by your own asking, you could find out the number of cows in the county, or NASS has an estimate of the number of cows in the county from that inventory. So let's just say that the number is, this is actually from a couple of years ago, but let's just say that the January 1st inventory number for cows is 9,200. You can take that number and you need an estimate of the weaning percentage, a typical weaning percentage for your county. I would get that from talking to an animal scientist or a knowledgeable rancher. But anyway, if you know that 83% of the cows are typically going to bear a calf, then you can come up with an estimate of 7,600 plus calves being produced, half of which are bulls, half of which are heifers. Okay, then you make some, assuming you know that typically 20% of the cow herd is kept as replacement heifers, you want to account for them, they're going to be held back. So that means that the calves that you have to sell are going to be the steers plus the leftover heifers after you've kept back that many. That's the total number of heifer calves you had, but you're keeping back that many, so you're left with this many. So that adds up to that many total calves to be sold. And then you need some estimate of the typical weight that they're sold and the typical price per pound that they're sold at. Where would I get that from? I would get that from a sale barn or from a knowledgeable rancher or your livestock committee or David Anderson. And you can compute the dollars, the typical sales per head. And so multiply that times the number of head, and you'll come up with an aggregate sales value that's going to go in the other beef calves line item right there. Okay. All right, so that was sale calves. The next one would be cull cows. Again, cull cows you can figure as a function of the total cows if you know a typical cull rate. So you get a typical cull rate from some knowledgeable source, your livestock committee, your animal science specialist, or somebody like that. You get your cull cows from a knowledgeable source or from USDA NASS cow inventory at the beginning of the year. You can multiply through to get an estimate of what the cull cows were, make some assumptions about how much they weigh and what their going price is, and multiply that on through and keep all your units straight. Come up with an aggregate sales value for that'll be listed. It'll be part of the slaughter cattle number. The other part will be bulls. So hang on to that number, and let's figure the bulls. If you know there's that many cows, here's this approach. You assume that there's one bull for 25 cows, then you can figure how many bulls there are. You can apply a typical cull rate, all of which you're going to have to get that ratio from some knowledgeable person. You're going to have to get that ratio from some knowledgeable person. But assuming you have them, you can apply them to the cow number, come up with the bull number, come up with the number of bulls culled, and then again, you're assuming a weight and a sale price, and keep your units straight, multiply it on through, and you've got the other piece the slaughter cattle number. So there was the cows, there was the bulls. Add them together, you get the aggregate slaughter cattle value number, and you put it in there. And see, I'm not even practicing when I'm preaching. There's no document. It's hard to get all the things that we did right here. You can't really scribble on that line. So that's in my defense, but feel free if you're thinking to yourself and scribbling in the side of the margin there, that's valuable information to us. So please turn those scribbles in. We'll thank you for it. All right. All right, so those were the major line items for cattle. That's going to apply to some similar different livestock animals, like, horses are going to be like calves. We're basically asking the question, how many horses were foaled and sold? That's the number you would do there. There's some aspects of sheep and lambs and goats that are similar to the cattle, either on the meat side or on the whole animal side. So you kind of follow the same procedures. You'll notice I gave no examples of poultry whatsoever because I know the least about that, except to say that, a lot of poultry products are going to be a function of the availability of the integrators and of the number of houses. So, I would guess that you could get production per house and find out how many houses there are in your county and sort of go from there. But if you have questions about that, raise them. You can ask me. I'll tell you. David Anderson and probably Justin Benavides up in Amarillo and other knowledgeable people are going to know a lot more about some of these livestock items than I do. So if you come to me with the questions, I welcome that. I'm probably going to point you in the direction of other knowledgeable folks. Okay. All right, so that would wrap up livestock. Then there's the other number of different things on these other. Let me talk about some of the classification. When we're talking aquaculture, we're talking about catfish ponds and shrimp ponds and things of that nature. When we talk about fishing, I think we're talking about the equivalent of a hunting lease. So it'd be guided trips, stuff that you might get from survey information of fishing if you have a lot of lakes or if you are on the coast. And then other stuff, furs and pelts, and there's the horse line, and there's timber numbers there, there's Christmas tree farms there, there's exotic animals. That's not the hunting of them, that's the production of them. There's another place for hunting. Fact is, the next worksheet is related to hunting. And the breakout here is basically to just kind of capture however you can get the numbers and however it fits the best. There's some parts of the state where there's a lot of day hunting. If you can come up with the aggregate income of that, put it in there. There's some parts of the state where in your county, you may happen to know that there are specific deer leases, there's specific and separate exotic whitetail deer leases versus exotic leasing. The ranch, the last ranch I hunted on, we had the rights all season long for whitetail hunting, but the rancher treated his exotic hunting as a day package, kind of a separate business. So however you get the data, I would say fit it in here and make it work. There's a distinction here that the worksheet makes between leasing total rangeland for hunting versus this annual lease for hunting. I don't really see the difference between those unless this involves just a certain part of the ranch, a certain pasture, and that's the whole ranch. Just make it fit to the data that you have is what I would say. And again, if you have questions, ask us and we'll make an interpretation with you. There's that point I was making there. All right, so wrapping up, again, when you have all those worksheet numbers, just remember that what's on the worksheets is aggregate dollars. What gets translated to the increment report form is in thousands of dollars. So please make that translation. When it comes to the forecast of the 21 year, what a lot of people do is just what they had for 20, they put for 21. What some people do is what they had for 20, it'll be 5% higher or 5% lower in 21, or it'll be a mix and match of 5% higher, 5% lower. There's not as much emphasis, there's not as much attention. As far as I know, there's not as much use. I'm not saying blow this off. I'm just saying what we care about more is the accuracy of the 20 numbers. It's hard to know what's going to happen in 21. So just give it your best guess based on the trends that you see. Either the climate trend is getting drier, or if you happen to know that, big agribusinesses are changing, or integrators are going out, or contracts for certain crops are going to happen or not going to happen, you can reflect that in that 21 forecast sheet. And I'll end with a sermon again. You can use this as an opportunity to, keep track of the pulse of what's going on in your county, so that you're viewed accurately as the expert in your county on all matters agriculture. So use it for that purpose. Use it so that you've got data that's available for us to use for, important things like, number crunching and damage assessment and interpreting the value of agriculture in your county. All right, that's all I had material wise. I'm going to keep my slides up so I can go back to something if somebody asks a question, and I'll just leave it open at this point. It's a little after 4. I'll stay as long as anybody's got a question. So I'm not watching the chat box. Maybe Robert will flag it for me, but just speak up. Appreciate y'all's participation and attention.
One question we had on the chat box was just asking about, maybe show animals and those type of things. Are those figured in, or are we just looking at figuring more of the total county production?
We're mostly considering the total county production. To be honest, I'm not sure how in the past show animals have been incorporated before. I mean, it's going to be realistically a value per head kind of number. If you have the total of the show animal numbers for your county, you could include it. What I would do, it would be most helpful for us, include it. If you have it, include it and put it break it out on a line, put it under other, but label it. Just label it as show animal income. And that way we'll know how to treat it. We'll go back and look at precedent. I'm not sure what the precedent is, to be honest, for treatment of show animals, but if it's just labeled as such, then we'll know how to treat it on our end.
Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat box. If somebody wants to unmute, they're more than welcome to unmute and ask a question.
Yeah, please. The thing that rattles me the most as a specialist doing Zoom calls is the lack of interaction. I can't handle it. Appreciate a live question.
Hey, John, it's Shane McClellan.
Hey, Shane.
It's always good to watch these recorded deals and then compare it to my notes and kind of what I've done in the past. So appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. I appreciate Robert prompting it. I've had Ag Eco district colleagues in the past who did a great job and did it all the time. And it's because they retired, and it's filling the gap by the good job that they did that we're kind of getting it. We should have been doing a statewide kind of training like this. And now that we're in the age of Zoom, I mean, we will. First of all, this one will get recorded and posted I guess we'll post it on the Ag Eco site where the increment report stuff is, and we'll do them. We'll do them in the future too.
I had a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
As new agents, I guess, is it just kind of picking up the phone and kind of just letting just ringing a bunch of people up and just kind of asking, I guess, asking the right questions is kind of the big thing.
Yeah. And that was kind of my goal in when I was going through about, where do you get acres from, where do you get yields from, that sort of thing. If it was me, I would sort of plan my own orientation to the local producers and the local agribusinesses, and particularly the local buyers and processors, like, the grain elevator and the cotton gin and the vegetable packing shed and the sale barn. I would go visit those guys just to introduce myself and establish relationships with them. But when I did, I would part of my mission would be to ask them about, volumes of cattle through the sale barn, average sale prices and average weights of calves produced, and that sort of thing. I would come in with a list of questions that I knew I needed for my increment report calculations. I would come in on the same visit and get some of that stuff from them. If I was doing it, I would probably, I hate making cold call kinds of visits to people. So I would come armed with a little bit of info. I'd probably get the info from that packet, the price info, the crop, what the crop prices were in Texas, what the cotton prices were. So that when I went and visited the cotton gin fella, I would say, hey, Mr. Jenner, I was wondering if I could ask you, what did your typical farmers sell, this year? I know it's early, they're just starting to sell, but, I understand, prices, statewide prices have been whatever, 65 cents a pound. What's the local price? I would come reflecting some knowledge of price info.
Gotcha.
Do a little homework before I show up. And
try
then,
not to look too green.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's the main thing, I guess. I'm on day 5 here in the office.
Wow.
So I guess it'll be a good way to, just dive in head first.
Yeah. I mean, you want to know those people. You want to be known.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You want to be known by those people. You want to have good relationships with them. You want to be a future source of information from them, and you want them to be a source of information that you can, tap into regularly. So just establish that relationship and, gather what info you can.
All right. Thank you. It's very helpful.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
John, one thing that I would add, just, and I know everybody's ready to get off, and thank you for doing this again, because like I said, we do have our economists retiring, and this is a good opportunity, and maybe it is something we can do on an annual basis. I think Shane brought up a good point. It's sometimes good to get an idea of how other people are doing it across the state to help yourself. But like you said, it's a team effort, and if you're brand new 5 days in the office, it's going to be a little difficult for maybe you to find those numbers this first year and make those cold calls. And do some of these things, but there are some point people, and I would encourage everybody, like I said, it's a team effort, whether it's a specialist or some of your fellow agents in your surrounding counties. Commodity prices aren't going to change a whole lot across county lines. Yields may or may not, depending on rainfall. So this is where you have to pull on the team effort. And we've got some, I know Shane was on here and said a few words here earlier. I know we've got some experienced agents on here that when it comes to filling out these ag increment reports, probably have some tricks up their sleeve of how they've pulled information and utilized their ag committee members. And like you said, the general operators, the elevator operators, and auction barn owners to pull some of those numbers and get some good average numbers that they can feel are confident. They don't have to be precise. It's kind of like what we're trying to gather in. We're not trying to hit bullseye every time, but if we can gather them and group them together, I think we're going to be better off. And as long as we're close and honest, I think that's a good deal. But call on your teammates, call on your county agents around you that have been doing this a while, and they can sure help you find some shortcuts to making sure they can get accurate reports.
Absolutely. Okay. If there's no other questions, then we can go ahead and wrap up. Again, I appreciate the participation. I appreciate the assistance. This is the first Zoom conference I've ever hosted, so which that probably showed, but we came through. So thanks for tuning in, and don't hesitate to get back to us. You need help with forms, you need replacement forms, you need direction towards data sources. That's why I'm here. So don't hesitate to get a hold of me.